All right, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to have an encore performance here at Utah as a discussant. When Avner and Jim asked me whether I wanted to discuss this paper, I said, keeping up with the Joneses, I know nothing about that. But then I quickly realized that had never stopped me before, so here I am. All right, so it's a fun paper. I certainly learned a lot from reading this paper by Ron and Peter. So let's get going. So what's the question? Question is a very simple one. Why is relative performance pay so uncommon in practice? And in fact, what people seem to find in practice is that people actually, CEOs get paid more when the other CEOs perform better, not less. So the question is why? The new answer here is that CEOs care about their pay relative to their peers, and because of that, they actually should get paid more when their peers do better. Essentially, the idea being that the relative wealth concerns overwhelms the relative performance evaluation. Now, as Ron said, there's actually an existing, I think, relatively plausible answer for the positive correlation, which is CEOs outside options increase in peers' performance. And that has been discussed in the previous literature, but that's not what we're going to do here, so I'm not going to talk about that. So here we're going to think about keeping up with the Joneses, just for those like me who are not that familiar with this. So just briefly, a taxonomy. Keeping up with the Joneses means that your utility depends not just on your own consumption, but on the contemporaneous consumption of others. Catching up with the Joneses would be if the others' compensation last period would have mattered. There's some discussion over whether things are external habits, meaning that it's others' performance, or in an internal habit where you take into account the fact that if you eat a lot today, tomorrow you remember that yesterday you ate a lot. Here what we have is keeping up, it's preferences of the keeping up variety, and essentially mostly an external habit. All right, now you might ask yourself, why would we want to keep up with the Joneses? That's a terrific question. Here it turns out to be, in this particular paper, it's simply because that's how the preferences are specified. But in fact, Ron and Peter, together with Ilan Kramer, in a sequence of papers, have sort of argued that actually general equilibrium effects can induce relative wealth concerns. And essentially, if there's a scarce resource, Palo Alto real estate, if all the other CEOs in Palo Alto do well, the prices go up, and I'd like to try to hedge that. By the way, this is an enviable set of papers and publications, actually. But what is most noteworthy here is actually that two of these papers were presented at the Utah Winter Finance Conference. And so including this paper now, it's 3 out of 4, so that's quite a feat that few of us achieve. So anyway, these are fun papers to this is paid for presentation. That's right. So these are fun papers to read, so I'm glad to see that Ron and Peter are working together again. So let's see. So this paper is about envy, and as you know, envy is a sin. Okay? In fact, of the 7 deadly sins, only envy is no fun at all. Okay? So I'm going to try to still have a little bit of fun with envy here anyway, so let's see. So envious of what? Okay? What people are envious of here is consumption or other people's income. Okay? Not their leisure, so it's not about, they're not envious that other CEOs are going heli skiing. Not of their utility. They're not envious of other CEOs being happier than them. They're envious of their income. Okay? So effectively, income is a status good. And in fact, it turns out that if this is an induced preference, as in their previous work, that's sort of actually plausible. So that's envious of what? Now, the other question is envious of whom? Okay? Well, other CEOs in this case, not divisional managers. You're not envious of your workers. You're not envious of the shareholders or billionaires. This is also plausible to some extent if you think it's about Palo Alto real estate, the price of yachts, and so on. But all right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to think about an economy with envy for a second. So I want to tell you a little bit something about the economics of the rat race. Okay? Consider the following economy. It's an economy with workers keeping up with the Joneses' preferences. There's a continuum of them, identical mass. They're all identical, and there's mass 1. And here's how they feel about things. They have a log utility of their own consumption. They're envious of others' consumption, cap C, which is the aggregate consumption, and they don't like to work. Okay? So now, my technology is going to be very, very simple. Effort will just translate into output 1 for 1. So the budget constraint will just be output has to be larger than consumption. All right? We're going to think about a competitive equilibrium in this economy. Market clearing with symmetry will give us that little c is capital C. All right. Let's think about what happens in this economy. Here's the agent's problem. Solve it. Take the first order condition. Your consumption and your effort is k plus delta times how much the other guys eat. All right. So let's see what happens in equilibrium. What happens in a competitive equilibrium is the following. The consumption in the competitive equilibrium and effort in the competitive equilibrium is k divided by 1 minus delta, 1 minus delta. Delta again here is just like in the paper, the preference for other people's consumption. What's the equilibrium welfare in this economy? It's a log k minus 1 minus delta 1 minus delta, decreasing in delta. People are more envious. What happens? In a more envious economy, people work harder, they have higher income, and they're less happy. All right. Now, can we get out of this rat race? Okay, let's think about the social planners problem. Now, the social planners problem, it looks exactly the same, except that now capital C here now is little c, because the social planner takes into account that when somebody eats more, then because everybody else is the same, that is going to have an externality. Take first order condition. Social planner chooses C equals A equals K. All right? So notice, by the way, so what is the Pareto optimum here? The efficient consumption and effort is then is K. By the way, interestingly, independent of how envious the folks are. So everybody works here exactly the same, but they all work K independent of how envious people are. The utility is log k minus 1 plus log of 1 minus delta. By the way, still decreasing in how envious people are. Envious people are less happy people. All right. Now, you might ask yourself, okay, can I implement this somehow? Well, first thing you might want to think about, just compare the Pareto optimum to the equilibrium. In the competitive equilibrium, agents work too hard, okay? And they're less happy, right? Why? Because they're all stuck in this rat race, which the principle, of course, internalizes this and keeps you from getting engaged in the rat race. By the way, the economy without envy, the competitive equilibrium is Pareto optimum. Now, implementation. How can you implement this? You can implement it with simple Ramsey taxation. So just have income taxation tau, a lump sum rebate t, solve the agent's problem, and then choose judiciously the tax rate tau equal to the consumption externality, and t equals to whatever you've raised, and you can actually implement the first best. So you can actually interpret this, if you like, as Europe versus the US. Here's how we are going to interpret this. Europe, high taxes, right, which we usually consider a terrible place. High taxes leads to low income, but people have more leisure. Happy people. Okay? In the US, low taxes. Everybody income is high, terrific. However, everybody works too hard, and people are less happy. All right. So at this point, you might ask yourself, wait, wasn't Adriano supposed to discuss the paper that Ron and Peter wrote? Yes. So let's get back to that. So a few observations. So I changed the preferences just because, like, I don't know, I was brought up as a macro person. But in fact, you can write the preferences, insert the equivalent exactly like Peter and Ron did, exact same. Everything follows exactly the same. All right? That's one thing. There's some discussion in the paper about scaling. So Peter and Ron scaled the utility by 1 minus delta. In fact, in my economy, it made absolutely no difference. There's some footnote that says it's critical for some comparative static. I wasn't completely sure. What happens if you don't scale it the way I did is, even in the Pareto optimum, the economy with more envious people is a less well-off economy. If I were to scale it, this last term would drop out, but it seems to me envious folks are unhappy folks. So, but in fact, I don't think it actually matters, is the point here. So moving on. So so let's connect it now to what Ron and Peter did. So they have the case with multiple independent principles, and what they found is agents work too hard, effort and output is increasing in delta, and welfare is decreasing in NV. Okay? With a single principle, and multiple agents, they found agents work the efficient amount, and effort and output are in fact independent of NV. Okay? And of course, the point of what I showed earlier is the competitive equilibrium with the rat race economy behaves exactly like this, right? So it's essentially the multiple principle case. There's no contracting here, so it's much less interesting than what they wrote, but it's that. And the single principle is just the Pareto problem, and internalizes it, and by the way, reduces it, so the 1 minus tau tax rate is exactly how I'm reducing your exposure to your own income. All right. Distortions, you can compare the distortions, right? My distortions was the economy, in the economy with envious agents, people scaled up their effort by 1 over 1 minus delta. In the case of Ron and Peter, it's 1 over 1 minus delta times 1 minus ys. So it's essentially the same with this, but what is this ys about? I think what it is about is essentially about a question of whether we have a finite number or a continuum of agents. In my economy, I had a continuum of agents, so you working harder would not change aggregate consumption, and so that ys was gone. Instead here, of course, you take this into account, and so I guess as a question, it would be nice to just solve out what happens in the economy with a continuum of agents. I think some things would be simpler. I think actually in terms of the relative performance evaluation, it won't be that interesting because essentially I think you can never have positive relation to the aggregate, but in any case, working out the continuum case would be nice. In terms of the intuition for efficiency, which was emphasized a lot, the paper right now says that the reason why the effect of the effort distortion has an effect on welfare is because higher disutility from risk leads to an overall reduction of welfare. But it seems to me that it's actually much more just that directly this rat race that people are engaged in. To be clear, of course, I'm not suggesting that this simple example that I worked out captures everything. It's obviously much richer here because we have the principal-agent problem, and it's principals competing, and there's this relative performance evaluation aspect. But I thought this would be a very good benchmark to sort of think about, as a starting point for how to evaluate these results. I should also, full disclosure, be clear that I didn't come up with all of this, although I did conjecture it, but then found it in the literature. So these ideas that envy really leads to income taxation, I mostly followed actually Lundquist and Uhlig, but it goes back to much farther than that. There's some related papers on firm, within firm wage compression when people are envious that are interesting. And more generally, there's a survey on relative income happiness and utility in the Journal of Economic Literature that really actually it's really encompassing, and it's a great read. So I recommend that if you're interested. Last thing I want to say is just a cute little observation. It goes like this. Suppose you're envious of somebody else. Okay, so you're envious of your colleague. And so here's your preferences. And the question is, would you want to know the colleague's salary? Okay. And but of course, you have rational expectations about your colleague's salary. And the question now is, but would you actually want to know it? Okay. So if you have rational expectations, you say, why would that matter? Well, actually, this model gives you a very simple answer. No, you don't want to know it. Why not? A risk aversion. So you're better off, even if you have rational expectations about what your colleague makes, you're better off not knowing what he actually makes, just because of risk aversion. Now, Ron and Peter, they do a bunch of stuff on the effects of disclosure, much more interesting than this. So this is really just a side remark, seemingly unrelated. All right, that's all I have. So again, what's the punchline here? Envy reduces relative performance evaluation, and in fact, if it's strong enough, then you may actually want to pay people more when the peers do better. It's a clever model, I think, providing a novel perspective. And again, I think like though this benchmark economy of the benchmark rat race economy sort of at least helped me understand what's going on in the paper. That's all I have. Thank you.